Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about stress, which a little odd to be excited to talk about stress, but we're going to reframe stress and talk about why stress can be your secret weapon and how to not get stuck, behind stress or stuck going down that downward spiral of stress that can really take us.
Are you there?
I'm here. Okay, hold on one second.
Shana, it's wonderful to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to come share with your audience, some other guys dealing with stress. I appreciate you facilitating this conversation.
Thank you. And stress is big these days, and especially for men. The suicide rate for men is much higher. I've seen stats from 3 to 7 times higher than for women. And, not all men listening to this, hopefully most men listening to this, or hopefully no man listening to this has considered suicide or has attempted suicide, but we don't know. And there, there's a whole range from that sense of feeling like you're dying inside to all the way to taking that action. And so to me, it does feel like a really important conversation of how do we navigate the inevitable stress that is in life and in a man's life, especially right now.
Yeah, no question. I think the past couple years have exposed some cracks.
Yeah.
The American Psychological Association recently said that across all professions, burnout is at an all-time high. Yeah. And it's really interesting that like 3 in 5 workers say they experience the negative experiences with work-related stress. One of which was pretty interesting is like 44% of people say they actually feel physical fatigue from working.
Wow.
Emotional exhaustion, cognitive weariness. And so it's like we've kind of put this big spotlight on stress is the enemy, when actually stress is the gateway to growth. Now, let me explain what that means. If you want to get good at anything, you have to deliberately engage in stress. So exercise. Exercise is a stress on the human system. Yeah. If you want to get physically fit, you have to stress yourself with aerobic exercise or resistance training. And if you were to just look at the outcomes of a singular bout of exercise, and if you just looked at those, you'd be like, that's a terrible thing.
Like it's a horrible thing for your body if you actually really looked at
You should never do that. And You're like, no, that's the only way I can get fit. If you want to learn a new skill, the only way you create plastic changes in your brain is by deliberately engaging in something difficult. And there's a sense of agitation that goes along with it. And there's some very interesting processes that happen in your brain through that stress that enable you to learn, grow. Okay. So the problem isn't stress itself. The problem is when stress exceeds your capacity to adapt. So acute stress. So for instance, like I'm just throwing in a weightlifting example here because I think everybody kind of gets this. You could press a weight, right?
Yeah.
No problem. If you were to try to push way more than you possibly could, eventually you exceed your capacity, the muscle tissue. It's called a stress strain curve, and you'll rupture the muscle.
Yes.
But there's also this long-term chronic stress, which I call the low-grade fever of stress that just lingers and grows. And what happens is there is a cost to your body every time you take on stress.
Yeah.
Because your body is an adaptation machine. It wants to adapt. But if it maladapts, that's when mental health issues come along. That's when you get sick.
Yeah.
And you suffer. The actual stress mechanisms are there because really a friend of mine, Dr. Alex Arbach, he's a director of wellness and development for the Toronto Raptors. He's actually one of our team members in Aim 7. He says that stress is your brain and your body preparing you to do something effortful.
Oh, interesting.
It's a different reframing, isn't it?
It is. It is. And then it's like, okay, how do you, I think what part of what you work with is how to go into the adaptive versus the maladaptive track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a few scientific terms I'd like to get cement in everybody's heads before we talked about how to do that.
Okay.
And if there's only two terms you learn today, one is allostasis.
Okay.
Allostasis is the ability to achieve stability through change. I think everybody would like that.
Yes, I would think so.
Your body is in this constant volley. It's trying to stabilize its internal environment, or as the scientific literature says, the internal milieu, to achieve stability. So like you experience stress, your heart rate, blood pressure goes up, the acute stress response, pupils dilate, palms get sweaty. That's all good. It's biasing you for action. It's enabling you to do hard things, but then you need to bring it back down.
Got it. Yeah.
And every time you take on stress, I mentioned earlier, there's a cost, and that is called allostatic load.
Okay.
There is a cost to adaptation. So what you want to do is you want to build more capacity to adapt to stress, to handle more allostatic load. And we call this adaptive capacity. So think about it this way. It's like your gas tank. If you have a big gas tank in your car, or you could think about it as like if you drive an electric vehicle, imagine you had a massive battery, right?
Yeah. Okay.
As long as you don't run out of fuel or energy, you're going to get to your final destination as long as the car is in working order.
Yeah.
If you have a small gas tank, no matter how fuel efficient you are, you're not going very far.
Yeah.
And every single day, you wake up with a different amount of fuel in the tank.
Do you wake up with a different size tank or just a different amount of fuel in the tank, right? Like, are you saying you can actually change the size of your tank?
Yeah, you can increase the capacity or size of your tank, but there's also how much fuel you have in that during that day. And so think about it like this. If all the stress that you could handle could fit into a bowl in your two hands, and then I were to say, like, go walk across the room really fast, and it was to the brim, water would be flying all over the place. Yeah. That's kind of like what happens when you've reached your capacity. Now, imagine I have a massive bowl that both of my arms can fit around, and I fill it with the same amount of stress. Yeah. I could run across the room and nothing's going to happen.
Right.
So if you have a bigger gas tank and you have more fuel in that tank, then the same amount of stress costs you less. So you can adapt to more stress at less cost.
Yes.
And so does this concept make sense?
Totally. Then my next, I think, natural question is like, okay, right. Where do we get the bigger bowl? How do we increase the size of the tank?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I love talking about it. There are 5 things that you can do, or 5 pillars to building adaptive capacity. The scientific literature is very clear that not only do these 5 things increase your ability to adapt to stress and they increase your capacity, but they also improve longevity and they help you thrive. And so those 5 things are, and there's nuance to all these things: sleep, exercise, mental fitness, nutrition, and living in community or fostering healthy relationships.
Interesting.
And so these 5 things, if you reach certain thresholds in these 5 things, are going to help you adapt to more psychophysiological stress. Physiological, because here's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
The brain and the body does not differentiate between physical or psychological stress. It's one input.
Yeah.
And it turns on the same systems.
Right. I think that's why I've seen some of the research of like why heartbreak actually has a physical sensation to it, right? It's because the body's not distinguishing, or the psyche is not distinguishing between the two.
You got it.
Yeah.
And so there's the two systems that there's really three, but the two that get the most pub are the HPA axis, and that increases glucocorticoids, of which cortisol is kind of a well-known stress hormone. Cortisol is great. The problem is when it's elevated when it should be depressed, meaning like during sleep and different periods of time. That chronic elevation can lead to sickness. And then there's this system called the autonomic nervous system. Has the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches, or the sympathetic has nothing to do with sympathy. It's more related to a bundle of nerves that go from your neck to your navel, but it's like the gas pedal and brake. When the gas pedal's down, stress is high, your bias fraction. When the brake is down, it's more that rest, digest. And where you want to spend more time is over on the left, the rest and digest.
Well, and I think some of us, I mean, I even relate to this as a woman. So I think it's not gendered, but I think for men especially, right? It's like sometimes at this point in our world and with everything going on, we don't even know that the gas pedal's down. It's just the way it is.
That is so true.
Yeah.
And people are like, I'm fine.
Right.
Well, you don't even know because you're stuck with the gas pedal. Your normal is not normal.
Right.
And there are ways that you can assess this. That's the beauty of things like wearable devices now, is you can get data that kind of starts pointing out some of these things. Then the question is, and we talk about later, like, what do you do with that? But so, yeah, there's these 5 pillars. And if you engage in them at a certain threshold, you're going to increase adaptive capacity. It doesn't happen overnight. The adaptation takes time.
Yeah.
You didn't get to where you are overnight. You're not going to get to where you want to be overnight, but slow and consistency always trumps intensity.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back into the 5, but the other thing I want to address is there's the moment of recognition or admitting, right? Okay. I'm stressed. There's something going on. I actually want to make a change. And so you can look at all 5 of those aspects, but I feel like there's even a moment before you see, right? Or before you know which one you need to do, that there's something that needs to happen in us where we're willing or able, or right, to like actually move in that direction. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
We have found, so my company AIM7 does this with technology, right? But I'll tell you an interesting finding. When we first started doing this, we found that people that had no semblance of any of these behaviors in their life at all, they were nearly impossible to help.
Interesting.
You don't have to be like, oh, I'm an avid fitness person, and if you just do something intentionally in your life right now, in any of these areas, or maybe 3 of the 5, like you deliberately go get on an elliptical a few times a week, or you deliberately like are conscientious of when I need to go to bed, and I'm trying to get to bed before midnight, or you try to eat a little bit, and you're just trying in some way, you can be helped.
Yeah.
If I hate to say it, but people that don't have any semblance or pattern, it's really hard to get them going.
Yeah. To get that traction or to make a shift.
It's hard.
Yeah.
You got to have a want to, or even just a desire. And so that's kind of the
commitment,
place to start.
Right? Because we can have a desire and then let all of the habits continue versus having a commitment to something new.
Yeah. And small, tiny behavior change is the best way to go.
The way to go.
Yes. Please do not feel like you have to bite off everything at once. That is a recipe for disaster.
God, but we want it to happen now.
Yes. And I think that's why a lot of people fail at like New Year's resolutions. It's like, I'm going to fix everything.
Right.
And then 3 weeks later, they're like, that was so daunting. I'm done. Yeah. Instead of just being like, you know what? I want to do this one little thing. I'm going to do it really, really well. And then when it becomes second, like it's down pat, then I'm going to add a little something else.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you, or can you give examples of when you have made a change in one of these areas, what has been a concrete example or a way that that's happened for you or one of your clients?
Oh, Yeah. I mean, we got lots of them. There's a gal that I don't want to use her name, but we find that a lot of people, the mental headspace area where like what we call mental fitness.
Yeah.
Or the ability to be consciously present, to process information without bias, and then to take deliberate action anchored in their values.
Okay. You just said so much in that one sentence. To be present and conscious without bias.
To be present. Okay. To be like, okay, I'm aware of where my thoughts are.
Yeah.
I can process information coming in without bias.
That's gigantic.
That's hard. And then to be able to make decisions anchored in my values. Yeah. So that's what we call mental fitness. A mentally fit person more often than not can do this. They can be aware of where they're at. They can take in information and then respond, not react.
Yeah.
That's in a way that's aligned with their values. And we've had tremendous results of people just being like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to focus on one great tool to improve mental fitness is to train awareness. How do you train awareness? Because attention is the currency of performance.
I love this. It really aligns. I have a year-long program for men, and the first module is awareness, right? To master awareness, because where your attention goes is where, right, the energy flows. And yeah, this is great.
There's a reason why we're together today.
Yeah.
And so one of the best ways to do that is mindfulness. And there's nothing spiritual about mindfulness. You know, it is consciously training your awareness. Yeah. People use, some type of physical cue, whether it could be the breath, it could be a physical sensation. They hone in on that. Our friend, Dr. Peter Haberl, he's a senior sports psychologist at the U.S. Olympics. He's the one that coined this term, attention is the currency of performance. And it's one of the hardest things to do. But when people start training this, guess what happens? They are no longer reacting to things that are happening. So you're not having the stress system getting kicked on, right?
Oh, interesting.
You're observing, you're able to go, okay, now I'm going to respond in a way that's aligned with who I am and my values.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've taken out this, I want to call like just instinct to just respond. And that's when you ramp up that sympathetic nervous system and you're more like, okay, I have a choice in the matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that gas pedal is not going down all the time. There's a reason why mindfulness has a direct impact on what we call vagal tone or autonomic the parasympathetic activation.
Yeah.
Yes, it's breath work, but it's more the fact that you are able to be aware and you're consciously not ramping yourself up.
Yeah.
And so we had this, I'll tell you, this lady write in, and she was like, I'm now a more present mother with my kids.
Yeah.
Because I've been training this. I didn't see it as a blind spot.
Yeah.
Other people, it's like now we live. So that's like on the mental fitness side. There's a lot of things you can do in the mental fitness space, but I think devoting time to training your mind is one of the biggest returns on investment. And Amisha Jha, she is a researcher at the University of Miami. Her lab demonstrates, for all those out there that are working really hard, there's nothing more satisfying than being fully engaged in work, like that flow state.
Yeah. And
mindfulness enables us to prevent task switching. It allows us to stay focused and we enjoy our work better. So even just they're finding around 45 minutes a week is enough to actually change the brain, improve this capability, and then allows you to get into that flow state and to be really focused and enjoy work, and your brain's not all over the place. So
45 minutes at a time, or
no, 45 minutes a week.
45 minutes of mindfulness a week allows us to get into that flow state more often.
It trains you. Yeah. You're going to become more aware. You're going to understand when your mind's drifting. You're able to pull it back, get back on task.
Yeah.
I've been doing it in weird places lately because I'm a busy parent.
Tell us about that. Oh yeah. I'm a busy parent too. So I'm like, right, I will do it anywhere and everywhere.
So it's really hard for me to do it like during the workday because I'm just so. But lately I've been doing more. The local gym that opened up has a sauna, and so I will go in there, and there's like 10 or 12 people in there, everybody's suffering. I'll just close my eyes and I'll just focus on my breath. And I'll do 10 minutes. And then I will switch to focusing on just beads of sweat rolling down my face. Here's the weird thing. As soon as I finish and I have like 5 more minutes left, all of a sudden the suffering begins.
Oh,
whereas I was in that environment the whole time, but because my focus was so honed in on a physical sensation other than this sucks.
Suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been doing that there. So I mean, I've been knocking out minutes, 30 minutes a week, easy in the sauna. And then I'm like, okay, I've got 15 or 20 more minutes to get during the week. I can fill it in here.
Yes.
Yeah. As we transition to spring, I'm in Houston. It's always spring or summer. It's never winter. I like to go on mindful walks. Just like hone in on the environment and see how long I can stay focused to the gravel under my feet, the birds. And it's like all of a sudden the world comes alive.
Oh my God. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. So this isn't like you have to sit there with your palms up, and if you want to do it that way, it's fine, but you can do it in so many different ways.
Yeah.
It's just a skill to train.
Yeah. Beautiful. And it does, for me, it's funny as a woman talking about mindfulness or meditation or something. I always love when men speak about it too, to men, because I think it could be written off from me saying it as like, that's some kind of feminine thing, or right. It's like, it's different, and it's very counter to the go, go, go orientation. So I love the affirmation, right? That it's not a feminine thing, or even if it is a feminine aspect of ourselves, the slowing down or the receptivity or the presence, right? It's incredibly supportive for all of the other aspects of a man's life as well.
100%. I think
bring it into relationships and sex and all of that. That's one of the things that I get to work with, which is incredible. It's so fun to see what that presence and mindfulness creates. And right, you get to see it too in the success and career and sports and all of that.
Yeah, when you're actually focused on your partner, instead of like your brain's off in outer space, like actually engaging in a meaningful conversation.
Yeah.
And that kind of bleeds over into one of the other pillars I would love to bring up here, and that's relationships, fostering healthy relationships. I was doing some research on, so there's a neuroendocrinologist named Dr. Bruce McEwen. He's a giant in the field of neuroendocrinology, and he really changed the way that the research was going in regards to stress about 20 years ago. He's the one that came up with allostatic load. And so I was doing research on like, okay, what are things that enable us to adapt to more allostatic load? There was actually a paper just on this listing all these different things. And one of the things that was really interesting that stood out, and this is agnostic to your faith, but there was a paper done that was like, I believe it was 5,600 people over about a 20-year period of time. And they found that those that had regular attendance in some kind of faith community had like a 55% reduction in all-cause mortality.
Wow.
And the biomarkers for stress, like blood lipid profiles, HRV, were all improved. Now, if you think about that, let's kind of break that down. Like, why would that be true? Outside of maybe having a spiritual aspect where you're connected to something bigger than yourselves, what happens in these communities?
People form relationships, and right, that shoulders the stress together, and then
yes. And then there was a paper that just came out of the University of Kansas that demonstrated that one meaningful conversation a day significantly lowers stress, it boosts mood. And so what's a meaningful conversation? That's deliberately engaging with somebody, with the intent to listen, with giving a compliment, like a real conversation. It doesn't have to be a spill your guts conversation. It could be simply, if you have a spouse, it could be 5 to 7 minutes in the morning over coffee, like hearing them.
Yes.
What does that require? To be present.
Yeah.
And this is the kicker. They looked at digital forms of communication like text and DMs, and they were nowhere near as effective.
Right. Probably the antithesis in a way. I mean, there's some connection that happens there, but
sure,
it also puts us in a different part of our brain and activates, I would think, right, less of that oxytocin or some of the relaxed hormones that happen or chemicals that happen as we're really engaging and being present with people.
It's hard to, I mean, there's a level of vulnerability that you don't get through text.
Yeah.
You actually have to like sit there with somebody. Tonight, there's a group of guys that I meet with pretty regularly and talk about life. And tonight at 8:00, we're going to get together and at a grocery store, restaurant, of all places. But
Love it.
the point being is like you're sharing burdens.
Yeah.
And guess what? That improves capacity for stress.
And I love that you just spoke to vulnerability, because that's one of the big things I work with too. But again, as a man, you know, not all men are walking around being like, yeah, and vulnerability is important. This is one of the ways that actually we reduce stress, is sharing our vulnerability together.
Yes. And can I push back on one thing you just said?
Yeah.
I want to encourage people on this. There's a phrase, and you didn't say this exact phrase. People are like, manage stress. I think we would all agree right now that we can't manage the economic climate.
Yeah.
You can't manage that. Can you manage if you're driving through an intersection and somebody hits your car? No. Not unless you're
most likely not, right?
Yeah. Can you manage how people respond to things sometimes? No. What you can do is adapt to that situation.
Yes.
And not let it bring you over the edge.
Yeah.
And I think if the past couple of years have taught us anything, is like, nobody saw COVID-19 coming in the way that would just kind of wreck everything for a while. But people that were in a maladaptive state or teetering on the edge, we saw the results of that.
Yeah.
And so building this capacity to adapt to stress impacts so many things in your life and situations. You're preparing for the inevitable storm. You're either going into a storm or you're leaving one. Life is like that, right? You're either going into a difficult situation, you're exiting one. And when you have that capacity and you have that clarity, it's not as overwhelming. And look, I'm not immune to this. When I transitioned, I spent almost 20 years in professional sports. I worked in the NFL. I worked with Olympic gold medalists, like at the most pressure-filled moments. When you train an athlete for 4 years and it all on the line in less than 20 seconds, like that's a lot of pressure, because their career could either be made or broken. But when I transitioned from being in that to being a startup founder, part of this stress thing is inoculation, meaning, you know, people are like, oh, you should be mentally tough. And, you know, let me tell you something. Like, I've worked with special operations units, right?
Yeah.
If you take a Navy SEAL, just throwing this out there, and you're like, that's never jumped out of a plane, and you put them at the doorway of a plane and said, jump, do you think they're going to have a stress response?
Yeah, I would think so.
They're going to flip out because they're dealing with impending death.
Yeah.
However, what they do is they take these folks, Army community, they take them out to Fort Benning, Georgia, and they teach them over a period of time how to jump. So it starts with like a small structure with a foam pit, and they just jump and land and roll and jump and land and roll and jump. And they do this over and over and over. And then they go a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. And then they have this contraption that's got a parachute that you're harnessed in, and it brings you up. It eventually goes up to almost, I think, 40 stories. It's crazy.
Wow.
But it just gets higher, progressively higher. So you're inoculating to the stress.
Yes.
So you cannot be mentally tough to everything. I think that takes a little bit of pressure off. Like, you have to be inoculated to it over time.
Right. And to know that even a Navy SEAL, right, who's jumping out of a plane, of course, that they're going to feel stress. I mean, maybe not, of course, though, because I think we have it that other people, you know, have something that we don't have. Everybody's
got this, you know, it's natural. But when I transitioned to this new role, you know, in football, every weekend, every Saturday or Sunday, you were judged in front of, well, I say the world, like ESPN, right? And it was failure or success on a weekly basis. And when I started my startup, the first time we rolled out like what's called a minimal viable product, it's like the smallest version of this thing, something broke. And to me, that was game day. And I didn't deal with it well. And it happened a couple times over and over again. And my engineers were like, Eric, you're going to have to develop some thicker skin. And I ended up getting to a point, I started having a panic attack.
Wow.
And that's when I realized, like, okay, Eric, you need to invest more because you were inoculated to the other stress. I'd go into a
Different
game,
kind of stress.
boom. And it was like, we'd play in front of 80, 100,000 people. We'd win. It's over. Game's over. We're moving on to the next one because the game's, season 16 games long, and all that matters is to win a Super Bowl or college championship. And this was just different. And I had to start training this skill. And now when something breaks, I'm like, okay, what's this? How are we gonna fix this? The world's not over. We'll email Apple has bugs. My company's gonna have bugs, right? So it's like, I'm trying to be vulnerable here and let people understand that, like,
thank you. I appreciate this.
Everybody experiences it. The key is how do you build out more and more and more capacity so that you can adapt over time?
Yeah. It's powerful. And thank you for, admitting that your humanity, because I think that's the way as we take in other people's humanity, we get to have more compassion for our own too. And I think that's one of the things I see with men, especially is, that sense of isolation or aloneness, especially if a man's never been in a men's group or had these deep conversations with other men, that it can seem like I'm the only one, or I'm somehow more, messed up than someone else. And it's just not true.
No, it's not. And you need to find community, whether it's just one relationship to start with.
Yep.
And, you don't have to be some extroverted person to do this, but you do need to find somebody that you can talk to on a consistent basis.
Yeah.
And if you're married, I would say that's great with your spouse. And then I would also find another person.
Yes.
That you can have a consistent, that's why community is so important.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I know we could talk about the 5 pillars, for endlessly. Is there anything else coming up for you?
Yeah, I'll bring up one more thing. And one of those pillars is exercise. And a lot of people were like, well, how does exercise help with mental stress? And I think this is really interesting to note, is that there's something called a cross stressor adaptation. What does that mean? Remember we said earlier that stress is this generic response. So you're turning on the same systems and turning them off. When you exercise, you are deliberately activating the same psychological stress systems.
Oh, interesting.
So what they're finding is when you deliberately engage in exercise and you hit certain thresholds, what's happening is your body's becoming more robust to those signals. And that robustness increases capacity. And so there's, several different things that you need to do consistently: aerobic exercise, resistance training, and there's certain thresholds. And that's another conversation for another time. But I think it's really important to know that when you are investing in your physical body, you're also investing in your mind,
your mental, right? In your mental health and well-being. And I mean, it's funny because when you said that people don't understand, my first reaction was like, it's so clear to me that I am in a better state when I'm actually moving my body. But then I really got, oh, right, I don't actually know why it works that way. So thank you for making that connection.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know that you have an amazing tool for people that your company has created. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it and where people can find you?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I wanted to be able to help people anywhere build this capacity for stress. So the company is called AIM7. And what we do is we take wearable technology data like your Apple Watch or Garmin or whatever. And the problem is those devices show you data, but they don't tell you exactly how to use it.
They don't interpret it. Yeah.
No. And they're not like, here's the action you should take today. So what AIM7 does is it gives you daily personalized recommendations for your mind, body, and recovery. Like
based on what it's tracking.
Based off of what it's tracking, your habits. And then we do something really cool. After 7 days, we analyze your data and we're like, here's the area you need to focus on to improve adaptive capacity. We create these small little goals for you. We give you the personalized recommendations. After just 30 days, the average person, a member on our platform, has a 31% reduction in stress. And they're doing 38% more workouts. They're sleeping better.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So it's not in the App Store. So it's in something called private beta, which means that we're in test flight. So we're letting people in cohorts a couple times a month, and they get 4 Zoom calls with me and my team. It's $15 a month. It's not a lot, But our goal is to give people a real white glove experience before we're going to do this for the first 10,000 customers. But if we have a waiting list of about 2,300 people, but if you sign up and you say, hey, you heard about me on the Man Alive podcast, we'll move you up to the front.
Sweet.
So
That's awesome.
Yeah. So for those other guys out there, we'd love to have you. I think the next one starts May 2nd, and then we've got another one towards the end of the month.
Okay. Awesome. And so how do they reach out to you, or how do they find you?
They just go to aim7.com and they can sign up there. And if they want to, follow me, I'm on major social media platforms at Eric Corum.
Awesome.
And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for being a man who comes from such a, masculine sports background, and also really integrates the mental fitness and mindfulness and relationships and presence and vulnerability. And, I love talking to men who straddle the realms and have found how much more, fulfilling and meaningful and exciting and connected life can be.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.